Hello, traveler. Welcome to a quiet evening on the Nile with Cleopatra. This is not the history you read in dusty textbooks. This is history as it whispers soft, slow, and scented with secrets. The wind begins first, warm and weightless, a hush over water. You are almost asleep now, limbs sinking into cotton sheets, breath slowing to the rhythm of the night. But before sleep takes you completely gently, something shifts. The light changes first, golden, dim, like oil lamps behind silk. Then the scent myrrh, sun-warmed stone, and something older, papyrus left in the sun too long. You open your eyes and somehow you're on a boat. But not just any boat. It rocks gently on dark water lanterns swaying on its rim. The deck is cedarwood sanded, smooth, still warm from the day. You feel the linen against your skin, simple, elegant, hand-woven. Your fingers find a beaded bracelet at your wrist. Your feet are bare. The sky is indigo, the last blush of sun slipping behind the western dunes. Ahead, the Nile stretches endlessly, the water quiet as breath, the kind of silence that only comes when a world holds itself still for just one story. And then footsteps, soft, deliberate. Sandals against wood. A woman approaches. She does not rush. Her silhouette is wrapped in gold and midnight blue. She walks like someone used to being watched and who no longer cares. "I was wondering when you'd arrive," she says. Voice like dusk, low, smooth, unhurried. You blink. "Where am I?" She smiles, but not fully. Her eyes lined with kohl search your face like a riddle only she knows how to finish. "You're on the Nile, of course. And it's late. That's the best time for story." A pause. "I'm Cleopatra." The name lands softly. No thunder, no trumpets, just a ripple in the current, as if even the river remembers. Queen of Egypt, pharaoh of the two lands. Former goddess, part-time myth, and full-time insomniac. She chuckles quietly. "I've never liked sleep. Too many dreams, too many men who thought they owned them." A papyrus fan brushes past your face. It smells faintly of jasmine. She hands you a cup, dark red liquid, cool in the desert air. "Pomegranate," she explains. "For remembrance, and because I watered the vines myself." You take a sip. Sweet, slightly bitter, like memories. She turns her robe, whispering behind her, and you follow because something in her presence invites trust, or perhaps demand it. The boat drifts slowly, effortlessly past lotus reeds and shadowed palms. Somewhere in the distance, a nightbird calls once and is answered. "I asked the river to keep its voice low tonight," she murmurs, "so we can talk. Not about battles, not about men, but about the quiet things, the real things." You say nothing. There's a rhythm forming now, her voice, the lap of water, the sway of lanterns. "This isn't a history of conquest," she continues. "It's a history of waiting, of knowing, of surviving men who think history is theirs to shape." A cat leaps onto the railing, sleek, silent, amber-eyed. It watches you like it's seen you in another life. Maybe it has. "Ah, Bastet's child," Cleopatra says, reaching to scratch behind its ears. "They always find me when the air changes." She leans back, reclining against a velvet cushion, hair catching the lantern light like polished bronze. "I don't mind sharing my story with you," she says. "Not the marble statue version. The breathing one, the laughing one, the one that worried too much and trusted too well." Another breeze brushes past. It smells of ink and old scrolls. A reminder this night isn't quite real, or maybe it's more real than all the others. So breathe in. Let the Nile rock you gently. Let Cleopatra guide the words, because tonight you are floating between worlds, with a queen who once ruled one and a river that remembers everything. This is Sleep Among Titans. And you, dear listener, are exactly where you're meant to be. If your eyes are still open, welcome. If they're starting to close, that's perfect too. The story will wait. It always has. And if this night brings you calm, I'd love to know. Leave a whisper in the comments, or simply subscribe. Leave a lantern lit so the next dream can find you. It's already waiting just a few bends down the river. The boat glides on, cutting a quiet path through the velvet dark of the Nile. Around you the water murmurs, never loud, never still. Cleopatra leans on the railing, gaze turned outward as if watching memories rise from the river's skin. I was born in Alexandria. She begins her voice just above a whisper. A city of marble columns, mosaic floors, and arguments too old to resolve. She glances sideways, a half smile playing on her lips. They called us kings and queens, the house of Ptolemy, great rulers of Egypt descended from Alexander's generals. But in truth, we were guests in a palace we didn't build. The lantern beside her flickers as the wind changes. Somewhere behind you, the cat stretches and disappears into the shadows again. My family, she says, was entirely Macedonian Greek. For 300 years we ruled Egypt without ever bothering to understand it. Her fingers trace an invisible line along the boat rail. We spoke Greek, ate Greek, prayed to foreign gods in foreign tongues. Even our coins bore foreign inscriptions. A pause. Except mine. You glance over. Her tone has sharpened, not in anger but in clarity, like someone remembering the exact moment they decided to stop asking permission. I was the only one who learned Egyptian, she says. Not a few phrases for parades or ceremonies. I learned it fully. I spoke to fishermen and scribes in their own words. And they listened. She smiles softly, but the corners of her eyes are tired. The priests didn't know what to make of me. My tutors rolled their eyes. One even said it was unbecoming for a woman of my stature. I thanked him politely and ignored him completely. The boat rocks gently, a lullaby in motion. I had to work harder than my brothers, harder than the men. Not to be better, just to be seen. They thought I was clever decoration. A girl who liked books, a harmless fascination. She laughs, low and warm. And yes, I loved books. I still do. But that never made me harmless. The breeze picks up, tugging at her robe. She doesn't seem to notice. Sometimes I'd sneak out of the palace, she says, tone conspiratorial now. Wrapped in linen, no jewels, just enough coin for tea and scrolls. I'd sit in the corners of bookshops and listen to students argue about Plato and poetry. They never noticed me. A pause. That was the only place I wasn't Cleopatra. She turns, leaning her back against the railing, now face lit by a nearby lantern. I once enrolled in a geometry class thinking it would earn me respect among the scholars. A smirk. I dropped out after 2 weeks. Angles bored me. Love poems didn't. You laugh softly. She grins. I still remember a verse from Sappho, something about fire running under skin. No triangle ever gave me chills like that. The moment lingers. Then she exhales slowly. But none of that mattered to the men in court. They measured worth in silver and armies. To them, I was either a threat or an ornament. She tilts her head thoughtfully. Sometimes both. The boat floats past a half-sunken pillar, perhaps once part of a temple, now swallowed by time. Cleopatra watches it fade behind you. I knew then that if I wanted to rule, I had to do more than study. I had to speak in ways they couldn't ignore. Her voice lowers more to the night than to you. So I did. I spoke 12 languages. I quoted old philosophers and newer heresies. I argued law, not just listened to it. And I made my words sharp enough to draw blood. A long silence follows. Then she says, "You don't take a throne with charm. You take it with presence." She closes her eyes for a moment, like listening for something deep in the river. And yet, for all that noise, all that effort, it was the quiet things that shaped me most. Listening, reading, walking alone through the library at dusk, running my fingers along the papyrus scrolls. Her voice softens again. I think that's when I became dangerous, when I stopped asking to be understood and started writing my own footnotes. She looks at you, not smiling now, just steady, clear. You've heard of Cleopatra the lover, the seductress, the queen who drowned kingdoms in perfume. She leans closer. Tonight you meet the one who stayed up late reading about tides and treaties. The one who built herself out of language. The river flows on. And in the hush of this strange evening, beneath a sky full of stars and stories, you begin to realize this was never just a throne. It was a test, and Cleopatra, before she ruled men, had already mastered the hardest thing of all, knowing exactly who she was. As the first light of dawn slips over the domes of Alexandria, you awaken on the deck of the felucca, Cleopatra's gentle voice guiding you ashore. The quay is alive with murmurs, lantern-bright eyes peering from behind carved pillars, scribes clutching scrolls as if they were treasures because they are. In this city of marble and mosaics, knowledge lies in hidden corners, whispered from hand to hand under the watchful gaze of the muses. Cleopatra steps onto the sandstone quay, turning to you with a conspiratorial smile. You know she says, voice soft as papyrus, they called Alexandria, the Paris of the ancient world. She waves a hand toward a narrow lane where torches gutter in the morning breeze. Here books aren't just read, they're revolution. You follow her through a labyrinth of stalls where merchants in dyed silks barter for imported perfume and frankincense. Behind them, doorways lead to hidden stairwells, secret entrances to the vaults beneath the great library itself. Sometimes Cleopatra confides slipping into a low archway I'd sneak in at night robes tucked in my belt, so no one would recognize the queen. A sliver of moonlight still clings to the marble as she leads you down spiral steps cut from soft limestone. The air cools, scented with the musk of aged papyrus and beeswax from flickering lamps. Shelves groan under the weight of leather-bound codices, Greek treatises, Egyptian hymns, all stacked in deliberate chaos. In this subterranean womb of ideas, silence is a sacred pact. But she continues drawing you deeper into the vault. Knowledge endures. Libraries. Those are easy to burn. She pauses beneath a scorched arch, a grim reminder of the first great conflagration. Enemies and allies alike fed these flames, hoping to erase rivals' truths. 3 times they tried. 3 times the world nearly forgot. A shiver runs through you as she traces her finger over a blackened glyph. Can you imagine, she whispers. A single torch, a stray ember, and centuries of wisdom vanish in smoke. Her tone darkens, but a spark of defiance glows in her eyes. Yet here we stand in the ashes of ambition, resurrecting every lost thought. She leads you back toward a hidden door, carved with the symbol of Thoth, god of scribes. As it swings open, you emerge onto a terrace overlooking the sea, where early morning fishermen haul in nets, and the gulls wheel overhead. Scroll-carrying patrons slip in and out of alcoves, their footsteps silent on mosaic floors. Cleopatra picks up a stray feather from her robe and jots an inked note on a scrap of papyrus. The only time they actually threw me out, she says with a mischievous glint, was when I dropped my own scroll of love poems into a well. The librarian was furious. He thought I was desecrating the archives. She laughs, and you can't help but join in, imagining the great queen tumbling verses into darkness. She tucks the note into her girdle and turns to you, lantern glow haloing her silhouette. Every exile, every fire, every stolen scroll taught me this ideas can't be bound. They slip through cracks, drift on the wind, and find hungry minds in the darkest corners. Her gaze holds yours, and that dear companion is why Alexandria will never truly die. With that, she slips a final scroll, a unique commentary on platonic love, into your hands. Keep this safe, she says, and remember, the fiercest flames may scorch a library, but not the human spirit that writes its stories. You step back onto the felucca as the terrace fades behind you, the city's heartbeat echoing in your chest. Lanterns wink out one by one, leaving only the pulse of the Nile beneath your feet, and Cleopatra's parting words drifting on the breeze. Dream of hidden scrolls and whispered philosophies, for tomorrow we sail toward new mysteries. As the felucca glides under a shroud of pre-dawn mist, you find yourself at the precipice of a kingdom torn apart. Alexandria's marble columns loom like silent sentinels of a court in turmoil, their white stone flecked with the first hints of age and disarray. In the distance, banners of Ptolemy's rival factions flap like wounded birds, and the echo of clashing swords drifts across the river. You clutch the rail heart, quickening as Cleopatra steps onto the quay with a calm that belies the storm around her. She turns to you, dark eyes steady. I was only 21, she begins, voice gentle as the Nile at dawn. Young enough that most expected me to cower when the palace gates slammed shut behind me. You picture her draped in royal linen, escorted at sword point by hostile guards. They exiled me on a whisper, she says, tossed me out like yesterday's scroll. A soft breeze carries the scent of salt and jasmine as she leads you along broken mosaics and discarded shields. But if you want Caesar to listen, she continues, tone conspiratorial. Now you cannot merely knock at the door. You must appear like a prophecy. You lean closer, intrigued by the promise in her words. So I did just that, she whispers, and you catch a flash of mirth at the corner of her lips. Night deepens around you as she guides you into a dusty courtyard. Amid fallen clay pots and shattered columns lies a rolled-up tapestry, its colors dulled by time. With a flourish, she kneels and spreads it on the ground. The first time I lay in a carpet, she confesses it wasn't for decoration, it was for survival. A chuckle escapes you at the image, the young queen curled within woven silk heart, hammering beneath gilded threads. Yet behind the humor, you sense the weight of her audacity. They carried me, she says, wrapped in prophecy and dust past guards who never dared unroll such a tapestry. You imagine the scene, startled sentries parting like reeds, whispers rippling through the courtyard. The queen, she returns, and then the heavy loom unfurling to reveal Cleopatra's calm gaze. Sometimes she muses, power comes not from armies, but from the shock of possibility. The carpet's fringe brushes your fingertips as she stands regal, even amid chaos. Torches gutter to life, casting elongated shadows along the palace walls. They thought exile would break me, she murmurs, voice low as distant thunder. But I found that fear binds only those who yield to it. You follow her through a half-ruined hall where courtiers cower unsure which banner to raise. She pauses before a towering statue of Ptolemy's forebear, its stone eyes unblinking. I looked at his face, she says, and spoke not as a supplicant, but as Pharaoh reborn. You watch as she strides forward, every step, measured every fold of her robe a declaration. Guards lower their weapons. Advisors straighten their backs. In that hush, you feel history pivot on its axis, an empire reclaimed, not with bloodshed, but with the audacity to defy expectations. Outside, the morning sun bleeds gold across the sky, illuminating a city on the brink of peace. Cleopatra turns to you, hair glinting like burnished copper. At 21, she reflects, I learned that sometimes the greatest weapons are surprise and resolve. A distant trumpet calls, heralding her decree to restore order and welcome the faithful back to court. You breathe in the warmth of a new day, the tang of dust and promise mingling in the air. She offers you her arm, guiding you back toward the key. In the chaos of crowns, she says softly, the boldest prophecy is living proof. As you step onto the felucca oars, dipping in unison, you carry with you the echo of her journey from exile in a carpet to the throne reclaimed. Lanterns flicker on the shore, and the Nile's gentle song embraces you both as the city wakes anew. As the felucca's oars dip quietly into the misty dawn, you disembark onto the cracked marble of Alexandria's royal quay. Torches gutter against ancient columns, their flames flickering like hesitant guardians of a palace teetering on the edge of collapse. Banners torn by civil strife flutter overhead, and the scent of jasmine mingles with the acrid tang of fear. In this fractured kingdom where siblings wage war for the crown and loyalties shift as fluidly as the Nile, she steps forward with a calm that belies the turmoil beneath her linen robes. At barely 21 years old, Cleopatra found herself exiled on a whisper. One day she was queen. The next, she was simply a name scrawled on dispatches wearing the stain of treason. You can almost see her slender and undaunted, forced from her own throne by vengeful courtiers. Exile taught me many things, she confides, voice low and sure as river water. But above all, I learned that if you want Caesar to listen, you cannot merely knock at the door. You must appear like a prophecy. She pauses beneath a shattered archway, marble petals of lotus, carved in relief, now chipped and worn. Your skin prickles at the half-heard echoes of palace intrigue, whispered plots, midnight assassinations, and the rustle of silk as guards conferred in shadowed corridors. She tilts her head, eyes glinting with quiet defiance. They thought that banishment would break me, she says. that my blood still warm with youth would congeal in the chill of rejection. Instead, she hatched a plan as audacious as a desert storm. You follow her through a maze of rubble and half-collapsed halls until you come to a deserted courtyard. Here the stones are scuffed by chariot wheels and stained with the dust of uprising. Underfoot, the fragments of discarded mosaics reveal glimpses of the Ptolemaic crest, a reminder that power can be shattered, but its pieces still bear the weight of sovereignty. In the center lies a grand tapestry, once a decorative flourish, now faded by sun and neglect. She kneels beside it, gathering its length with nimble fingers. The first time I lay in a carpet, she confesses a teasing lilt in her tone. It wasn't for decoration, it was for survival. You picture the scene, a young queen wrapped head to toe in woven silk, breath shallow, as she hid among colored threads, heart hammering as hostile eyes passed mere inches away. A grin tugs at her lips as she smooths the fringe. I was 21 when I did this. 21, and brimming with certainty that shock even more than bloodshed could rewrite destiny. She unrolls the tapestry, slowly revealing a portrait of a lion and an eagle entwined symbols of strength and vision. Under the gaze of morning light, she steps onto the woven surface and you stand back marveling at her poise. Soldiers guarding the gate, a mix of hand-picked loyalists and reluctant conscripts, halt mid-question. Their spears tremble as though sensing the shift in fate. She beckons you closer, voice steady. Watch how a prophecy walks, she murmurs, toes curling along the carpet's edge. As the tapestry unfurls, the courtyard falls into a hush. Courtiers clutching parchments and decrees freeze in place. The air seems to slow time, pooling around her like gilded water. You feel the weight of centuries in that pregnant pause, the knowledge that empires are shaped not solely by armies, but by moments that shatter expectations. Power, she says, is not a matter of pedigree or bullion alone. It is the audacity to become the very story people whisper in hushed awe. With a single measured step, she crosses the threshold into the palace's inner court. The guards exchange uncertain glances, then lower their weapons. Courtiers straighten whispers cascading like silk. The queen returns, they breathe voices tinged with wonder and relief. You sense the tide turning history, coursing back into its rightful channel. Even the crumbling frescoes seem to lean forward as if eager to witness her reclamation. Beyond the courtyard lies the Hall of Petitions, a grand chamber lined with statues of forebears who once ruled these lands. Each carved visage, chipped and weary, now turns to regard her as though awakened from stone. You follow as she strides down the central aisle, every footstep echoing against polished marble. Advisors once plotting her downfall now bow their heads in deference. Scribes frantically unscroll old proclamations, blotting out edicts of exile and inscribing new ones in her name. Midway through the hall, Cleopatra's eyes sparkling as she begins the tale. I was 21 and newly exiled, stripped of my throne, and left pacing these very stones, she says, voice soft as desert wind. When every door slammed in my face, I realized if you want Caesar to hear you, you must arrive like a prophecy. That night, I found myself in the palace's secret courtyard, staring at a tapestry faded by time, but still proud with golden lotus. I tucked my crown into a satchel. No one must know their queen was about to hide in plain sight, and then, quite calmly, I folded myself into the carpet. First my skirts, then the bodice sleeves, until only a dark curl peeked from beneath the threads. I pressed my cheek to the coarse wool and thought, if you can't storm the gate, become the floor. Hi. As she speaks, you imagine her body curling into the weave breath held beneath the watchful eyes of carved sphinxes. Moments later, she continues with a grin. 2 guards thundered in lanterns, swinging armor, clanking, ready to haul the tapestry off for redecorating. One complained, "This thing's heavier than a crate of amphorae," and the other muttered, "Maybe they stuffed it with clay this time." They never suspected that royalty lay hidden within. Cleopatra's smile widens as she paints the scene. They marched me through echoing halls, the carpet swaying like an unwitting prisoner. Courtiers peered from behind columns, eyebrows arched, but still no one dared unroll the secret until we stood before Caesar's dais. She leans forward, voice dropping playfully. At his command, the guards knelt and pulled back the final coils. I rose silk, cascading like sunrise, and the hall froze. Spears clattered, quills fell silent. Caesar leaned in amusement, flickering in his eyes, and said, "Remarkable entrance, my queen. I expected trumpets, not carpets." Cleopatra chuckles, the memory still bright. I dusted off my hem and replied, "When walls lock you out, sometimes the floor will welcome you in." The court erupted in laughter and applause, and in that moment, Alexandria remembered its queen. Her gaze drifted to the flickering Nile beyond the window. That night, she concludes softly, "I learned that power lies not only in blood or blade, but in daring to rewrite fate one rolled-up tapestry at a time." Outside, the sun has risen fully, gilding rooftops and minarets in molten gold. The city stirs to life. Traders hawk spices along the quay, fishermen haul nets ripe with silver scales, and children chase one another through narrow lanes. You and she walk side by side toward the quay once more, the bustle of a newly ordered Alexandria humming around you. Before boarding the felucca, she pauses at a weathered pillar inscribed with ancient decrees. Placing a hand against its cool surface, she draws in a breath heavy with reflection. "Exile can hollow you out," she says, voice grave, "but it can also fill you with purpose. At 21, I discovered that sometimes you must vanish like a ghost to return as legend." You meet her gaze and see in her eyes the echo of that night wrapped in prophecy, heart blazing brighter than torchlight. And now she adds, "The kingdom knows Cleopatra does not cower." She makes her own proclamations in carpets or courts, and they carry the weight of destiny. Stepping into the boat, you settle onto the bench as she raises one hand in farewell, the breeze catching her robes like a banner unfurled. The oars dip in unison, sending ripples across the Nile's mirrored surface. Alexandria recedes behind you, a realm reborn through the audacity of a young queen's return. Dream, she calls voice, drifting across water of the power that lives within daring hearts, and of the moments when silence breaks like thunder. And as the felucca glides into the morning haze, you carry with you the memory of exile and prophecy, knowing that some revolutions begin not with swords, but with the boldness to step upon a carpet and command the world's attention. Cleopatra leans forward, eyes dark with memory, and lets the rippling water of the Nile carry her back to those heady days beside Caesar. When I met him under the olive boughs of Tarsus, I thought politics would be our only bond. Instead, it became passion fused with ambition. She pauses, tracing the rim of her goblet with a slender finger. He was the first to call me Isis. She murmurs, voice soft as twilight breeze, the goddess of resurrection and fertility. In his arms I believed it. But when whispers turned to scheming, he became the last to truly trust that my devotion was more than a role. You see the flicker of that trust, how it shone bright, and then dimmed with every court intrigue. Caesarion, she says with a fond smile, was our secret triad. Rome, Egypt, and that stubborn little boy who believed everything belonged between his tiny clasping fingers. She chuckles. He'd crawl through palace dust just to taste it. Like his father, always craving power, even if it meant eating a handful of dirt. The lantern light glints in her eyes as she recounts the festival at Dendera. I donned the robes of Isis gold filigree linen that shimmered like rays of dawn and led the procession through Alexandria's marble streets. Caesar followed as Osiris incarnate, regal and low-voiced. The crowd knelt, lanterns swaying, hearts alight with awe. I held out my hands, palms upward, and the scent of frankincense curled through the night air. Her voice grows quieter, almost secret. In that moment, our union became myth. Two sovereigns embodying gods, and the world watched breathless. Yet behind every divine gesture, I felt the weight of expectation to be both lover and goddess, mother and ruler. She tilts her head, gaze drifting to the river's gentle pulse. He named me Isis, but when the tides of Rome turned, he no longer saw the queen of rebirth. He saw only threat, an eastern sorceress, too cunning to reign beside him. Cleopatra's hand closes around the goblet as if sealing a promise. Still, those blazing days taught me that love and power are inseparable, and that even gods can be human when their hearts burn too fiercely. She leans back, the Nile's lullaby rising around you both, and with a wry smile adds, "Remember, my friend, passion can crown you as surely as blood. But only trust can hold that crown in place." Cleopatra settles onto the velvet cushions of your felucca, the waning light of day painting her features in soft gold. She gazes across the Nile as though summoning the ghosts of a city now half her own, and begins, "After Caesar's fall, Rome became a country I once called home, and then abruptly would not." She says, voice low as the river's current. "When the echoes of his final breath reached the Senate, they cast me from their imaginations as easily as yesterday's scroll. They called me witch, that sorceress of the East who beguiles emperors." A flattering title. If only I'd learned magic, I could have turned dreary Roman porridge into a feast. You smile at the image, the great queen of Egypt, hunched over a cauldron of grain, muttering incantations to rescue a bland mess. Cleopatra's eyes twinkle. "But alas," she murmurs, "I never mastered culinary charms." Roman cooks still winced at my offerings of spiced figs and honey cakes. She leans forward, the Nile breeze lifting a stray strand of hair. "So I did what any self-respecting mother queen would. I gathered my son Caesarion, my miniature tyrant of 7 summers, and crossed the sea back to Alexandria. He was my secret legacy, born of love and politics in equal measure, yet Rome refused him even a token of legitimacy. They inked his name only on whispered rumors." Cleopatra's gaze softens as she recalls her son. Caesarion adored the palace gardens. He'd scuttle across sun-warmed stones, snatching handfuls of soil with the same fierce delight his father once showed for conquest. One day I found him licking dirt from his chubby palm. I laughed so hard I nearly toppled my gilded chair. "Well done, my boy." I told him, "You inherit more than Rome's backbone. You inherit its mess." You chuckle, picturing the little prince gleefully muddying the marble floors. Yet, through every triumphal arch and every jeering whisper, I remembered Caesar's words, "You are my Isis." He named me the goddess of new beginnings, but in the wake of headlines branding me enchantress, I needed more than a divine epithet. I needed sanctuary. Cleopatra's voice grows wistful. In Alexandria, the familiar stones welcomed me. The scent of lotus and papyrus drifted through open colonnades as though nothing had changed. But everything had. The palace felt emptier without Rome's legions, a silent stage waiting once more for its queen to return. She pauses, weight shifting on the cushion. I convened the council of Ptolemies, those who remained loyal, and those too timid to show their faces. I reclaimed my throne not with swords, but with steadiness, reminding them that power lies not in foreign favor, but in the hearts of one's people. Cleopatra's smile glows with gentle pride. "And what of my son?" she whispers, voice tender. "I declared him Pharaoh Caesarion, monarch of 2 worlds, though Rome never inked his claim. In our temple rituals, I anointed him at dawn, honeyed oil and rose petals in his hair, so that perhaps his people would see the divine spark Roma refused to acknowledge." Her eyes drift back to the shimmering water. Still, every festival I held reminded me how fragile legacy can be. I once led a procession dressed as Isis, my robes gleaming under torchlight, Caesarion at my side garbed as Horus. The city bowed, lanterns swirled, children danced in the streets. For a single night, Egypt reclaimed its ancient magic. Cleopatra's laughter is soft, echoing like distant bells. But the morning always came. The Senate's gossip slipped across the sea like pestilence. She parades her son as god, her spells know no bounds. And so I ruled with hymns and harvests and the occasional honey cake for the stubborn Roman palate. She tilts her head, sharing a conspiratorial grin. In the end, she reflects, I discovered that home is not a place but a promise you keep alive in your own heart. Rome may have deemed me witch and interloper, but here, beneath these skies, I remain Cleopatra, lover, mother, and queen, unbowed by legend or scandal. The felucca's lanterns burn low as you absorb her words. Cleopatra draws a slow breath, eyes luminous with quiet conviction. Remember, she adds voice both playful and profound, that true magic lies not in changing porridge, but in transforming exile into empire and in teaching a small boy that even dirt can feed a throne. She leans back, the Nile's lullaby rising around you, and with a final smile murmurs, "Shall we sail onward to brighter shores?" Cleopatra's gaze drifts to the distant horizon as she recalls the pageantry of Tarsus, her voice soft, yet vibrant with memory. I first met Mark Antony aboard a dragon ship that cut through the eastern Mediterranean like a streak of midnight. She begins, eyes alight. Oarsmen in crimson tunics rowed in perfect unison, and incense smoke curled above the deck in lazy spirals. I stepped onto the gilded gangplank, each footfall greeted by trumpet fanfares and the flutter of exotic banners. She leans forward, voice lowering conspiratorially. They say I arrived under a canopy of frankincense, myrtle and myrrh, perfuming the air so thickly that even the sea breeze tasted of revelation. Behind me, a troop of monkeys in silk tunics tumbled and chattered, part of the spectacle I'd arranged. Yes, I admit it, I commissioned a troop of Capuchins dressed in gossamer robes to amuse him. One of those little rogues nearly stole Antony's heart before I could. Cleopatra pauses, a wry smile curving her lips. When Antony first set eyes on me, he was entranced, but not by my words alone. I had orchestrated 7 days of feasting music and marvels, each banquet more sumptuous than the last. Statues dripped honey from alabaster trays. Dancers spun beneath chandeliers of captured moonlight. He never suspected it was all a test of his devotion. I did not need him to love me, she says, voice firm as polished bronze, only to believe that without me, he would lose. She tilts her head thoughtfully. And believe me, he did. On the third night, he rose to offer me the first goblet of rose-ringed wine and promptly tripped over what he thought was my royal serpent. Cleopatra chuckles at the memory. He lunged forward, eyes wide, convinced my belt was a live asp. When he realized it was but twisted fabric, he flushed crimson, and so did the court. You catch the sparkle of mirth in her expression as she continues. It remains one of my favorite recollections, the great triumvir brought low by his own imagination. His dash of panic only endeared him to me more. Her tone softens as she recalls their conversations. We spoke of empire and desire beneath the vaulted pavilions where tapestries whispered of distant gods. He confessed ambitions that stretched from Rome to the Nile's delta. I spoke of Egypt's ancient foundations and the fertility of its soil, and of Caesarion, my son, whose destiny lay entwined with both our worlds. Cleopatra's voice grows pensive. Yet I understood that Antony's heart was not so easily claimed. Pride coursed through his veins like chariot dust. So I wove a festival of marvels, gladiators clad in gold, fire-breathing artisans, orchestras that played songs of Troy in minor keys, each designed to kindle his awe and bind his allegiance. She leans back, letting the memory unfold like a tapestry. By the end of that 7th night, Antony stood before me beneath an arch of lotus blossoms, incense drifting like drifting dreams, and vowed that Egypt's fate would be Rome's gain. Cleopatra's lips curve in a satisfied smile. He did not declare his love, I did not require it. Rather, he pledged that without me and my resources, Rome would falter. Her eyes soften as she reflects on the bond they forged. In that crucible of spectacle and diplomacy, we became unlikely partners, he, the soldier of Rome, I, the queen of the Nile. We balanced ambition with intimacy, strategy with sensuality. And though history remembers our union in tragic hues, I cherish those luminous hours at Tarsus, when a queen's cunning and a general's resolve converged beneath monkey-draped pavilions and incense-laden skies. Cleopatra's voice drifts back to the present, serene and resolute. Remember, my friend, she concludes, that power is the art of spectacle and sincerity entwined, and that sometimes you must fill the world with marvels to inspire the heart to follow. Cleopatra's eyes soften as she recalls those halcyon years back in Egypt, and her voice drifts across the gentle swells of the Nile. When Antony chose to stay, she begins. He slipped from Roman legions into the soft rhythm of our eastern court. Imagine a man who'd led legions through Gaul, now reclining beneath date palms, sandals off toes burrowing into cool sand. He wore a diadem of lotus flowers, and for a time he was not the triumvir of Rome, but a king of the Nile. She leans back, a wistful smile tracing her lips. Power had once divided the world into thirds, Rome, Egypt, and the Pontic realm, But in those days, hearts were divided only one way straight to Cairo. Antony ruled beside me, in tandem, his sword kept close at hand, but for once he let it rest. Instead, he raised goblets in my honor, savoring the sweet vintages we pressed from our vineyards along the delta. Cleopatra's tone grows conspiratorial. We even devised a little game among close friends. Who can spend 10,000 silver drachmas in a single night? Imagine the spectacle silks strewn from palace balconies, belly dancers spinning beneath chandeliers of captured moonlight camels, parading through banquet halls dripping with jasmine garlands. Antony, with that glint in his eye, once bought out half the perfume vendors, just so he could watch me sniff dozens of vials and declare one his essence of eternal summer. She laughed softly, the sound like warm sunlight on water. That night he joked that Egypt's pleasure was worth more than the weight of every legion's pay chest. He was only half serious, though he did leave most of those drachmas for me to distribute at dawn. Her gaze turns reflective. Yet, even in the midst of decadence, I never lost sight of purpose. Antony may have embraced the ease of my realm, but I reminded him that a kingdom's strength lies not in revelry alone. I guided him through temple rituals. He learned to pour libations to Isis, to trace the hieroglyphs with reverence. In return, he taught my priests the tactics of Roman warfare, building alliances that bound our worlds more tightly than any treaty. Cleopatra's voice lowers, infused with pride. Still, some nights were electrified with a different kind of wonder. At a feast beneath the stars, I served wine infused with pearls. Real pearls ground to dust in golden mortars, so each sip left a glimmer of lustrous dust on the tongue. Antony raised his cup with surprised delight and declared, "By Venus, this tastes like moonlight." Many guests recoiled at the thought of pearls in their goblets until they tasted it, and then all recoiled no more. She pauses, letting the memory settle. We laughed over that because it was absurd and yet perfectly fitting. For what is power if not the ability to turn the impossible into the habitual, to drink pearls as though they were water and smile because you believe the world is yours to shape? Her expression turns thoughtful as she addresses you directly. You must understand, my friend, that those years were golden not merely for their extravagance, but for the unity they forged. Antony and I, Roman and Egyptian, showed our courts that blended rule could outlast any division of world or heart. Cleopatra's gaze drifts to the distant horizon. But even gold tarnishes and even pearls can cloud in bitter wine. Still, I cherish those days when Antony walked beside me not as a conqueror, but as a guest in my land, seduced by its beauty and the warmth of its welcome. Together we redefined what it meant to share power, not 3 empires, but one vision, one. She settles back, voice dropping to a soft murmur. Remember this as you drift into dreams tonight, that true strength comes not from hoarding realms, but from spending them lavishly on trust, laughter, and the occasional cup of pearl-dusted wine. A final smile graces her lips, and the Nile's gentle lullaby carries you onward toward the next horizon of her story. Cleopatra's gaze darkens as she recalls the campaign Octavian unfurled against her. Her voice soft, yet charged with unwavering conviction. Octavian's assault on my reputation, struck like a serpent's strike in the night she begins, and you can almost feel the hush that fell over Rome's forums when the first rumors of the Eastern enchantress slipped from senator to senator. They painted me crowned with cobra coils, eyes, hooded lips curled into a serpent's grin, an image that whispered of dark arts and hidden poisons. You lean forward, imagining those lurid posters plastered on marble walls, the city's pulse quickening with each fearful murmur. She lowers her voice conspiratorially, a wry smile flickering at the corner of her lips. They did not fear me because I was a woman, she confides, voice smooth as polished obsidian. They feared me because I was a woman who knew how to wield words like weapons. You nod, tasting the irony in the river breeze that drifts across the deck. Cleopatra's laughter low and knowing ripples through the night air like distant thunder rolling across the desert sands. I gathered their rumors as one might collect petals. She continues, reclining against a carved column. Every slander, every whispered cautionary tale became a testament to my craft. If I had a silver drachma for each time someone warned, "Beware, Cleopatra is dangerous," I could have bought Rome itself. You can't help but chuckle at the thought of her tallying fears like coins in a purse, each one a token of her power. She straightens eyes, drifting toward the west where the Mediterranean meets the sky. My first countermove was to drown out their whispers with deeds rather than words alone, she explains. I issued edicts praising Rome's virtues, sending envoys laden with gifts of rare papyrus and alabaster to remind them of my respect for their traditions. I commissioned treatises on law and philosophy, inscribing my commentary in the margins so that my wisdom would travel as far as their legions. You picture those scrolls unfurling in distant libraries, her words weaving through the minds of scholars who might otherwise have dismissed her. In Alexandria, she continues, I transformed my court into a beacon of cultural unity. I sponsored lectures by exiled Roman philosophers who had fallen from favor, giving them a platform beneath the vaulted colonnades of my palace. Their voices filled my rose-scented gardens, debating virtue governance and the fate of empires beneath pergolas heavy with grapevines. The result was a festival of ideas that outshone any rumor of sorcery. You can almost hear the clash of dialects as Greek and Latin intermingled the hum of respectful argument buzzing through the air like bees around blossoms. Her tone grows playful as she recollects her most daring retort. Within the hallowed halls of the great library, I penned speeches so artful that when traveling rhetors recited them in the Greek cities of Asia Minor, their words rippled westward into Roman ears like an irresistible current of reason. In those orations, I did not speak as Cleopatra the Ptolemy, or Cleopatra the lover of Caesar or Antony, but as Cleopatra the philosopher queen, a patron of learning who believed knowledge once liberated could outlast any empire. You close your eyes hearing the orator's voice rising and falling in crowded forums, stirring minds with the promise of a broader horizon. A gentle wind stirs the lanterns overhead as she describes Octavian's counterattack. His pamphleteers churned out lurid epistles depicting me as a temptress whose every gesture summoned doom. They called me a harbinger of plague and famine, a shadow that crept beyond Egypt's borders to devour Rome itself. You shiver slightly at the memory of those pamphlets, grim leaflets read aloud in the forum, their words sinking into hearts already primed for fear. And yet, she says, tilting her head, their attempts only widened the chasm between their fear and the admiration I inspired. In the bustling ports of the Red Sea, merchants began selling miniature amulets molded in the shape of the serpent on my brow, fused with goat's foot charms, promising eloquence to their bearers. They claimed a fragment of my power could rub off onto anyone clever enough to wear it. You grin at the image of merchants hawking these trinkets to anxious travelers, each charm a tiny rebellion against Rome's vilification. She leans forward once more, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Rumors even attributed the Nile's annual flood to my whispered incantations and the swallows circling the Pharos lighthouse to my command. I allowed the stories to spread just far enough to unsettle my enemies. Then, I invited visiting envoys to stand on the lighthouse balcony at dawn. Together we watched the birds wheel on the Mediterranean breeze. No chords or spells, needed only nature's grace and the power of expectation. You breathe deeply, picturing the gulls dancing in the sunrise and the looks of wonder on the envoys' faces as superstition gave way to awe. Cleopatra's expression becomes thoughtful as she recounts the diplomatic aftermath. When Roman envoys protested, branding me a sorceress, I reminded them gently that the Greeks had built the temples of Ephesus and Delphi, yet no one called them witches. The line between awe and accusation often rests on nothing more than perspective. You absorb her words, marveling at how deftly she turned fear into fascination, suspicion into scholarship. Her tone softens as she reveals the counsel she shared with her son in their private letters. To Caesarion, I confess that I deliberately struck the coinage with the image of a viper's head, not to invite their slander, but to remind the world that power often carries a sting. Let them whisper that I coil like a serpent, I wrote to him, for it is better to be feared than to be overlooked. You imagine the young prince reading those lines, feeling both the burden and the validation of his mother's fierce wisdom. The winds shift again, carrying the scent of night-blooming lotus across the deck as she describes the ongoing contest. Thus, the media war raged on two fronts in Rome. Caricatures of my monstrous form proliferated, while in Alexandria, and Antioch poets and playwrights composed sonnets and tragedies that celebrated my intellect and resilience. In their verses, I became a symbol of endurance woven into the tapestry of Hellenistic lore. You can almost hear the strains of new plays, actors declaiming her virtues on stages carved from marble, the applause echoing under domed ceilings. Through it all, she maintained court with serene equanimity, she says, hosting philosophers and statesmen alike in her rose-scented gardens. When word reached me that Octavian had called me the Eastern Sorceress in the Senate's forum, I organized a grand symposium featuring readings from Demosthenes and Cicero, whose own words against tyranny I admired and challenged attendees to distinguish between rhetoric used to enlighten and rhetoric used to enslave. You picture the symposium unfolding beneath pergolas of vine and flower, the keen minds of the Mediterranean gathered to debate power's proper use. Cleopatra's final flourish comes as she describes her ultimate act of defiance. I commissioned artists to capture my likeness, not with fangs and coils, but with a scroll unfurled in one hand and an olive branch in the other, symbols of wisdom and peace. These portraits graced temples from Memphis to Byblos, silently countering the tales of me as a viper queen. You envision those statues lining colonnades, her serene visage reminding passers-by of her true legacy. And when the final edicts of war were proclaimed, she stood upon her palace's grand terrace, gazing westward, robes fluttering like banners of defiance. In that charged silence, she might have spoken the words she whispered to a trusted aide. Let Octavian brand me a witch, better that than a memory. The winds off the Mediterranean whispered back through the night, carrying her certainty like a banner through time. While swords may rule empires, it is the indomitable spirit of voices unbound that carves history into the annals of eternity. ChatGPT John Noy. Cleopatra's eyes grow distant as she summons the memory of Actium, her voice soft yet threaded with the tremor of loss. I stood on the deck of my royal galley. She begins, watching the dawn's first light glint on oars and sails as Antony's fleet arrayed itself against Octavian's legions. The sea was calm, almost too calm, in ominous stillness before the storm. You lean in, picturing the two armadas stretching toward the horizon, their prows carved like dragons' heads, banners snapping defiantly in the breeze. She pauses, the flutter of a silk sleeve the only sound beneath the great sails. When the signal came, she continues, voice low. The trumpets of war shattered the morning hush. Antony's triremes surged forward, bronze rams slicing through water, while my own ship, painted to resemble the goddess Isis herself, held back in the rear. I did not flee in fear. I withdrew with purpose. You can almost feel the spray of sea foam taste the salt on your lips as you imagine her decision unfolding beneath oaken planks. Cleopatra's tone darkens with the weight of that choice. He needed me at his side, our fates interwoven like the ropes of those ships, but I chose Egypt over passion. I guided my galley away through the lines of battle, the smoke of burning timbers curling around me. I had learned too well that a queen without a kingdom is a ghost. Even the love of a brilliant general cannot feed a people. You catch your breath at the gravity of her sacrifice, the wrenching pull between devotion and duty. A ghost of a smile flickers on her lips as she remembers the absurdity of war. If I had known that those wooden vessels burned so readily, I would have built them from incense. At least then the flames would smell of frankincense rather than pitch. You can't help but let out a soft laugh at the image of incense smoke galleys drifting across the waves, troops coughing in perfumed haze. But the laughter dies as quickly as it comes. Cleopatra's gaze hardens. Behind me I heard the crash of oars and the roar of catapults. I knew Antony would press on, convinced he could break through Octavian's line. I hoped he would understand why I left him, that my land needed me more than he did. Yet when I turned back to look, I saw him alone atop his command deck, swordsman at his feet, his face set like carved stone. You feel the ache of that moment, the quiver in her voice as she recalls his stoicism. Her words settle around you like a shroud. When I reached the shore at Samos, my family and courtiers rushed to greet me, their cheers a hollow celebration. In that tumult I searched the horizon for Antony's ships, but they remained lost in smoke and flame. There is a tremor now, an almost imperceptible catch in her breath, as she admits, I feared I had abandoned him. Cleopatra draws herself upright, voice resolute. I sent what messengers I could spare, urging him to withdraw to spare his men further bloodshed. But no reply came. At last, as the sun dipped below the sea, one of my captains returned cheek streaked with salt and grief. He told me that Antony's flagship had been overtaken, that he had surrendered his sword rather than flee. You imagine the hush that fell over her court, the stunned silence of those who had revered both sovereign and general. A single tear glints on her cheek as she whispers, "He never blamed me. He understood." The shock of that confession strikes you like a thunderbolt. Cleopatra inhales deeply, voice steadying. In his final message he wrote only 2 words, "Egypt lives." Then silence claimed him. You press your hand to your mouth, sharing her sorrow at a love so fierce yet so irrevocably divided by destiny. The night wind stirs her hair as she raises her head. I laid his message on the altar of Isis beneath flickering oil lamps. As I knelt, I felt the weight of every choice I had made. The treaties brokered the feasts, throne the alliances forged. And in that litany of deeds, one truth shone clear. A queen's heart must often break for her people to endure. Cleopatra's voice softens memory and regret mingling in the embers of her words. When Octavian heard of Antony's surrender, he proclaimed victory across the empire. Yet in Alexandria, we wept for our fallen general even as we prepared to face the conqueror at our gates. I donned the robes of mourning linen so sheer it brushed my skin like a caress, and stood before my subjects not as the consort of a Roman triumvir, but as Pharaoh of Egypt. You envision her draped in white torchlight, flickering on her bowed head, a pillar of grief and resilience. Then, with that trademark glint of wry humor, she adds, "And I did wonder, as I addressed my people, whether someone might at least offer me a piece of incense, something to remember him by, and perhaps to burn the ships myself." You smile sadly at the image of Cleopatra, sovereign of the Nile, brandishing a censers as if it were a naval ram. Her gaze lifts once more to the dark waters beyond. In the aftermath, Antony's absence was a silence deeper than any roar of battle. He left behind a legacy of valor and passion, but I carried forward a burden of leadership heavier than a trireme's anchor. I chose my country over my heart, and in doing so, I ensured Egypt's survival. Yet each time the sea breeze brushes my cheek, I remember his silent understanding, and my own vow that his sacrifice would not be in vain. As she falls silent, the lapping of the Nile against the hull is the only sound. You remain beside her, bowed in shared reverence for the queen who chose her kingdom over love, and for a general who, in his final act, understood her sacrifice without uttering a single word. Then, with her gaze softened by the settling dusk, she leads you back to the present moment, standing side by side on the riverbank, where the Nile flows in silver ribbons beneath the first stars. The city's lanterns flicker behind you, a distant hum of life receding as only the river's steady murmur fills the air. She lets her fingers hover just above the surface, watching tiny waves lap against the sand. In that pause, she seems to listen to every word the water might carry away. They once worshipped the Nile as a living god, she murmurs, voice low and reverent. They built temples on its banks, poured libations into its current, believing it carried the breath of creation itself. You imagine ancient priests stepping into its depths, their robes swirling like spectral petals, trusting the river as a conduit between earth and eternity. Cleopatra glances at you, eyes reflecting the water's quiet glow. I've come to believe it will cradle my story, too, every triumph, every sorrow carried down its boundless course. You lean in, entranced by her words, and the scent of lotus drifting on the breeze. The river's surface ripples with its own soft laughter, as if affirming her thought. She lifts a hand and lets a single petal slip from her palm onto the water. With the current, it floats away, a delicate promise of remembrance. Alexandria's distant bustle fades completely. Here the world is distilled to one endless flow and the weight of memory. Cleopatra's shoulders rise in a gentle sigh. The cruelest lesson I learned, she confesses, voice edged with both wisdom and regret, is that we must be strong to survive and be vulnerable if we wish to be remembered. She turns to you, eyes bright as torchlight. Strength held me upon the throne, warding off blades and betrayals. Vulnerability etched my name onto the hearts of those who heard my story. A hush settles between you and the river, broken only by the whisper of water. Then, with that trademark glint of wry humor, she adds, I once longed to be a poet, to spin verses that would drift on warm breezes like incense smoke. But Rome did not need my odes, it needed swords. She gives a slight shake of her head, as though tasting the bitter irony. And so I traded rhyme for resolve, letting steel and strategy carve my legacy instead of stanzas. You smile sadly at the trade she describes, picturing Cleopatra hunched over papyrus late into the night, quill poised only to set aside her musings for war councils and treaties. Her laugh is soft, almost hidden like a reed quivering in the current. Still, she says, I scribbled what lines I could, lines that lived only in my private scrolls, never destined for public eyes. Perhaps they rest now beneath the sands, waiting for some curious hand to unearth them. A gentle breeze lifts her hair, and she inhales deeply, as if drawing sustenance from the river itself. I wonder, she muses, if the Nile remembers those verses too, if it carries them buried in its depths toward lands and people I have never known. You picture the river's journey through canyons, oases, bustling ports, spreading her whispered confessions far beyond the pyramid's shadows. Cleopatra tilts her head, following a flicker of starlight on the water. They once called the Nile the living heart of Egypt. I find comfort in thinking that as long as that heart beats, so too will my story. Her voice takes on a tender note, as though speaking to some unseen current. History may forget marble monuments, but it cannot silence a river's memory. She steps closer to the water's edge, and you mirror her movement toes brushing damp sand. I have felt more loneliness standing on a triumphal dais than kneeling in exile, she admits, gaze fixed on the liquid horizon. A crown can be as isolating as a prison. The farther you rise above the world, the more you stand apart from it. You sense the echo of distant crowds, their cheers hollow against the emptiness that can follow power. Her lip quirks with a rueful smile. Once, after a festival of drums and torches, I returned to my chambers and realized I had spoken to no one but my own reflection in the mirror. It was then I understood that solitude is the price of sovereignty. You catch the flicker of pain behind her eyes, softened now by acceptance. Cleopatra straightens cloak, brushing the sand. If you ask what lingers when the laughter fades, I would say it is the fragile moments of connection, the touch of a friendly hand, the warmth of shared laughter, the quick glance that speaks volumes without words. Her gaze meets yours, and for an instant time seems to hold its breath. Then, with a final spark of gentle humor, she turns back to the river and whispers, If the Nile carries my story, let it know I loved with every ounce of my strength, and that sometimes the bravest thing is to let your guard down so others might hold you in their hearts. She pauses, letting the river's song fill the silence, and you sense that in its flowing waters her voice will echo for all time. In that moment, Alexandria returns distant lanterns, far-off music, the soft stir of night creatures, but here at the water's edge, you and Cleopatra share a quiet covenant. As the current slips by beneath a canopy of stars, you press your hand to your heart, vowing to carry her story forward. And in the hush before tomorrow, you know that memory, like the Nile, is a river without end, one that will keep her alive in every flow, every whispered ripple against the shore. Then, as the night deepens and the city's lanterns blink their final glows, she leans toward you, voice dropping to a breathy whisper that seems to merge with the rustle of papyrus reeds. If someone remembers me, she murmurs, gaze drifting to where the Nile vanishes into darkness. Not because they loved me, but because I once loved an entire land, then I am truly alive. Her words hang in the air like the last note of a lyre, fragile yet insistent. You sense the weight of her confession as the river's current slips by beneath you, each ripple carrying her promise downstream. Remember this, she continues, tone warm with possibility. Love does not fade when it is shared so widely. It endures in every grain of sand, every whisper of wind that brushes these banks. You feel the hush of history settling around you, a soft cloak woven from centuries of memory. A gentle smile curves her lips, and with that trademark glint of wry humor she adds, "And if you ever retell my story, please spare the snakes. I know they make for dramatic flourish, but they've suffered enough at my expense." You can't help but chuckle at the image of a weary serpent rolling its eyes at yet another dramatist's stage. "Seriously," she says, voice lighter now, "I never intended to haunt every corridor in reptile form." Cleopatra's gaze finds yours in the lantern's glow. "I've seen artists carve my likeness onto countless coins," she reflects, voice softening with bittersweet amusement. "The last one issued in my name bore a nose too large and a chin too sharp. Hardly the ideal of beauty sculptor's dream, but a truthful imprint of who I was." You imagine that final coin clutched in a merchant's palm, its flaws proclaiming her humanity more powerfully than any polished portrait. She lets a breath escape, and you hear the underlying tremor of farewell. "That imperfect face," she says, "is my final testament that reality need not conform to myth. It is in our imperfections, our odd angles, our unlikely choices that true character shines." The river's hush seems to agree, lapping gently against the shore, as though applauding her honesty. In the cool night air, she unfolds her arms in an invitation. "Now go on, carry this whisper with you." Her voice is a thread weaving between stars. "Speak of my triumphs and my failings alike. Let them know I was as passionate about jasmine and philosophy as I was about power and politics. If you remember me for that, I will live on in every heart that beats with devotion to something greater than itself." You nod, overwhelmed by the intimacy of her farewell. She offers a final radiant smile, one that warms you like a sunlit chamber. "Sleep well," she whispers, "and when you wake, may you find inspiration in the simplest of things. A river's song, a coin's rough edge, and the promise that love can echo through eternity." With that, she straightens the lantern's glow, outlining her silhouette against the rippling water. You stand in the embrace of her farewell, knowing that her voice will ripple through time, as surely as the Nile carries stories to the sea. Tonight she has whispered her last promise, and in that soft confession, Cleopatra's reign continues not in marble halls or gilded tombs, but in every heart that remembers her love for an ancient land. The Nile's lullaby fades as Cleopatra's final whisper settles over the river's banks. If you're still awake, dear traveler, let your dreams carry you through moonlit courtyards, where temple cats prowl on silent paws, their eyes gleaming like polished onyx. The golden sands of a lost kingdom await your footsteps, each grain whispering legends of gods and pharaohs. Your home may seem ordinary. Your own cat might tilt its head in bewilderment as you murmur of pyramids and palaces. But that's exactly the magic of these night journeys. Somewhere a sleek temple feline curls upon a marble column, purring in approval of your curiosity and courage. You've sipped incense-sweet wine beneath papyrus fronds, stood beside queens in linen shrouds, and heard the secrets of sphinxes carried on desert winds. Now, as the stars wheel overhead, rest knowing these tales live on in your heart and in every soft paw step echoing through your dreams. When you're ready to wake or to wander once more, the next adventure lies just one silent velvet-clad step away. Let the temple cats guide you there.